So a few months ago, I made a video called R Factor 1 24 Hours of Le Mans. This video, as of late, is by far my most watched on the channel. So a massive thank you for that. That also got me thinking, how about I do the same race with 1980s sports cars? To be more precise, Group B, and of course, Group C. I decided to pick a Group C car for this race. I could have picked the Porsche 956 like any other YouTuber seems to do, but that would make for a boring video, because everyone else drive it due to it being the most successful Group C car by a country mile. So I picked this car instead, the Lancia LC2. The Lancia isn't really as well known compared to the Porsches, Jaguars, the Sauber Mercedes, that one loud Mazda and the Peugeots, and that is because who ran this car in the WSC knew that they were Italian, fast but unreliable. For context, it took pole at Le Mans in 1984 by 11 seconds, but it could only manage an 8th place due to gearbox issues. Also, I did a test drive in it the other day and it was more fun to drive than the Porsche. So before we get started with qualifying, first thing or two about turbocharging. A 4-stroke engine does 4 things. A mixture of fuel and air is sucked into the cylinder, squeezed tight by the piston, ignited by the spark plug and blown out into the exhaust system. With a naturally aspirated engine, those gases are let out directly via the exhaust and don't serve any further purpose. When you attach a turbine to the exhaust system, those gases go into the turbine, spool it up, and that does some cool stuff. When powered by the exhaust gases, the turbine, or turbo, forces more air through the intake, resulting in a lot more power. To measure how much air is forced into the engine, the car is fitted with a boost pressure gauge. The turbo puts the intake air under a lot of pressure. So much so, the unit for boost pressure on this side of the globe is in bar. On the highest boost map, the Lancia's engine produces 3 bar of boost, meaning the engine works 6 times as hard as it normally would do if it didn't have the turbo. This in turn is good for about 900 horsepower. Now, given that I haven't driven anything with more than 400 horsepower and rear-wheel drive lately, I selected the car in its glorious Martini livery, loaded up the old Monza and did a shakedown, plus some initial setup work. When driving out of the pit lane, I was almost immediately met with what cold tires feel like again. If you haven't noticed before, when I got out of the pit lane, my tires were stone cold. So I had 0 grip, meaning that I had to take it very easy while cornering. After lap or 2, as is evident right here, it was perfectly fine. I could keep a decent pace and really felt one with the car. which is very important in endurance racing since you have to make as little mistakes as you possibly can. Looking back at the first session, it was alright. It felt good to get back behind the wheel of a Group C car again. These cars for me are the perfect balance between speed, aero and mechanical grip. Despite this car using the Venturi effect, or ground effect, it still relies a lot on mechanical grip, which is very evident in the medium speed corners. After having set a good banker lap time, it was back into the pits to change some settings. Monza is perfect for testing a Le Mans spec setup, since it's one of few tracks that matches the top speeds reached at the Circuit La Sarthe. In my personal opinion, the shakedown felt a bit mid, but looking back at what I learned about the car and having rewatched the footage for this video, it was a very productive session, despite me overdriving and pursuing lap time, which in hindsight was pretty useless, because in order to do that, you'd need a track specific setup. In other words, I'd need a setup for Monza, but I'm making one for Le Mans, not Monza. That is not the reason we came here. We came to shake down the car, get used to it, and work on a setup package for Le Mans, which is exactly what we did. So let's go to the actual track, shall we? The layout used for the race is the early 90s layout, without the uninterrupted Uno gear. The reason I picked this layout and not the more historically accurate 80s layout is because this one doesn't give the Lancia much of a straight line speed advantage, thus leveling the playing field just a little bit and maybe makes the video a bit more interesting as well. Also, I would just get bored of how insanely long that straight is every single time I get onto it. That's how long the straight is. Anyway, we are now coming across the line for our first of many laps I'll be doing around this track. Okay, yeah, never mind. I decided to redo the session, but this time I would set the conditions up for the actual race, so I can do some race simulation runs.
Air temperature's decreasing. It's now 24 Celsius.
So while I'm doing my first stint, let's talk about endurance racing. This discipline is quite different from other forms of track racing, because of a few things. First off, the distance. Endurance races are much longer than normal races in inverted commas. Instead of a 10, 15 or 30 lap sprint, the races are up to 24 hours long. This means that being as fast as possible over a single lap and fighting for every single position is not the way to go about this. Instead, it is all about being as efficient as possible, which translates to being as fast as possible over a single stint. A stint is the distance you cover on a single tank of fuel or single set of tires. How long that stint is depends on how many laps you can do on that one tank of fuel and or tire set. Normally you keep driving until you have no more fuel left for another lap. The best way to do a good stint is to drive as efficiently as possible. How is that done, you may ask? Well, I can just show you. Right now I am driving as fast as I can without feeling like I'm about to crash. My average lap time is a 3:53, give or take. I did 5 laps and my tires are about 50% worn. In Formula 1 or any other racing series, this sounds like your average stint, but over a 24-hour race, this actually ends up costing you time, because making a pit stop takes time. In particular with these cars, filling up a tank of fuel takes 2 minutes and changing the tires another minute, give or take. In this stint, I decided to start using fuel and tire saving techniques. The most important one being lifting and coasting. Lifting and coasting is done by getting off the throttle well before the braking zone. So for example, here I get off the throttle at the 400 meter board and brake at the 200 meter board. Remember about the fuel and air mixture entering the cylinder? That only happens if either the engine runs on idle or on the throttle. When it's not on the throttle, it doesn't use any fuel. This is how that single trick can get my fuel consumption down from 15 liters per lap to 12. This means that on my second run, I was able to drive a whole 2 extra laps, while only being 2 seconds per lap slower.
You've cut the track.
And over a 24-hour race, with up to 25 to 30 stints, that adds up. However, this version of the race will only be 1.2 hours,
Watch your speed.
so not that long. But extending the stint for as long as possible will be necessary if I don't want to make another pit stop right at the end of the race. With the final test session done, it was time for qualifying. Qualifying in rFactor 1 works a little different from other sim racing titles. Normally, there is a session in which you have to put in a lap time and you get to do as many attempts as you find necessary. In rFactor 1, however, you also have a session, normally 1 hour long, to put in a lap time.
There's a car leaving the pits.
However, you only get a certain amount of laps to get a time on the board. Some mods give you 30 laps, but in most circumstances you get a total amount of 12 laps. This also includes in and out laps, so you need to keep that into account when driving.
Now delete this lap, you've cut the track. Yellow flag sector 2.
After some failed attempts at setting a proper lap, I went on an all-out attempt to get as high up the grid as possible. That was at 3:51.1 seconds. Sector 3 time is fast. And would you look at that? We had done it. Pole position at Le Mans. However,
Here we go.
during these sessions I realized that the Porsches are alarmingly quick in a straight line, which means winning the actual race will be difficult. With that in the back of our minds, let's go.
go, 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 go!
At the start, I managed to catch everyone napping and bolt off into the distance, building a 7-second gap to the guy in P2.
Pascarolo is closing the gap. It's now 6.4 seconds.
This doesn't mean, however, that we just got the race win in the bag, because we are only 2 laps into a 24-hour race. This field, during the duration of the race, will be shaken up multiple times. So, hypothetically speaking, someone high up the order can suddenly be sent all the way down to the back of the field within the blink of an eye. So now that we are getting settled into a rhythm, I want to take some time to talk a bit more about this car, because I didn't get to in the intro. Despite having the characteristics of your average Italian sports car from this era, fast at the cost of being fragile, the LC2 is, in my opinion at least, one of the most underrated sport prototypes of all time. The Lancias during the early years of Group C were the only cars that could somewhat match the Porsches, and from time to time give them a run for their money. Unfortunately, that was during qualifying, since they usually were seen falling through the pack like a stone in water on race day. Because the Porsches could more often than not capitalize on Lancia's lack of reliability and its thirsty Ferrari engine. The LC2 only raced for a few years, with Lancia eventually withdrawing to focus purely on rally, where they went on to rack up wins and titles with the Delta S4 and Integrale. Meanwhile, the sun has set, and it is time for the night. The night at Le Mans has got something to it that cannot be described, nor compared to something else. Cars become nothing more than a very bright shining object, flying past with a massive roar or scream through the trees. One moment they are just a light in the distance, the next fly past at insane speed and disappear. At no other race do the cars drive this fast at night time. Up to 200 plus miles per hour. At this speed, the cars just become a blur to the spectators. From the driver's point of view, everything just becomes a blur. The unknowing bystander, this seems to come straight out of a scene from a science fiction film. Spaceships bolting into the dark unknown that lies ahead. For me, the night is probably the part of the race I look forward to the most. It is the most captivating thing ever about this race. There is something about this that is almost magical. Anyway, back to the race. We are still in the lead and it's almost time for our first pit stop. With our current fuel consumption, we are looking at a 2-stop strategy, which will give us the option to do a sprint to the finish if the situation calls for it. I just hit the wall there.
You've taken a tiny bit of bodywork damage, but you won't feel it.
It was a small tap though. Surely that won't add that much time to the... And we just lost an extra 82 seconds to repairs. With the extra minute lost, we go back on the road and just drive. Not make any more silly mistakes. However, that pass on the grass was pretty cool and they were holding me up anyway, so... yeah. So my infinite IQ brain thought it was a good idea to turn the damage multiplier up to 100%. The idea was that would make the cars more vulnerable to losing parts. With the cars in my short-lived career mode series, this was a great idea. Because in a race with those cars, suspension damage means game over anyway. And it would mean you would actually have to avoid the walls and be careful when you're overtaking someone.
We've been warned about track limits. P9.
With these cars, it was a terrible mistake. You lose way too much time to repairs and the damage isn't even that visible. These cars are literal tanks. We made quite a bit of progress with coming back through the field. And what do you know? We are in a podium position. Getting the lead back would be insanely difficult. Because all the way up the road is a Jaguar XJR5. Let me get this straight. The guy who started 18th on the grid and couldn't keep up at all is now in the lead of this race? Yes, that is correct. That is because this car is in fact not a Group C, but a GTP car. Yes, IMSA's top class at the time. This car is not as fast compared to the Lancia and the Porsches, but it can keep up a good enough pace to utilize its biggest strategical advantage. The Jag has in fact a bigger fuel tank, 120 liters instead of Group C1's mandatory 100 liters. This means that this car can do more laps than me while driving slightly slower. And it shows, because this guy has jumped me and the Porsches to take the lead of the race by a considerable margin. So for now, we just settle behind in P2 and get ready for our final pit stop. I was not going to make the same mistake twice by putting on my LCD that I didn't want to have any damage to my car fixed. It still feels fine to drive, so I'd better just have a small dent in my car than waste 10 minutes of my life having it fixed. Now, with having that decision made, let's head to the pits to get ready for our final sprint to the finish. Yep, I was in fact the target of an assassination attempt. This cannon Porsche behind me was a lap down. And he wanted his lap back. He wanted it so badly in fact, he'd be willing to risk his life and mine for a move up the inside at Indianapolis. Not just the actual corner, but the fast right kink leading up to it. This move is not on unless you're well alongside and the person being passed decides he loves his life more than his current position and backs out. In this case, the move was not on. So he hit me on the right rear, sending me straight into the Shadow Realm. This is probably one of the most violent crashes I have ever had at this corner.
Traffic when you exit the pits. We should come out into position 8.
When I got back to the pits, I was confirmed that my chances of winning this race were truly over. However, I still wanted to make it to the end. Going into the final lap, I got a final chance at some glory. Ahead is a BMW M1, and I want to pass it before the line. So for one last time, the race was on. Say it with me, not even close. The Jaguar eventually managed to win with a lead of over a lap, which is mental given that he started 18th. And on that bombshell, this is where the video is going to end. If you have watched the whole thing, you are a legend. Thank you so much. This video took a lot of work to make. If you want to support me in any way, you can do so by liking the video, subscribing to my channel, watch some of my other videos, and of course, share this with your friends. This is all from me, enjoy the rest of your day, and I see you all later.